And now we bring you Killer Wives, Episode 4, The Guardsman. These are the actual case facts of the murder of Norman Raymel McCaster, who was murdered by his wife. Isn't trust a bitch? A young Mrs. McCaster believes that she has just gotten away with the perfect murder. Springfield, Illinois, famous for the horseshoe sandwich, the birthplace of Abraham Lincoln, and the murder of National Guardsman Private Norman McCaster. Our story starts on a long and winding road during deer season when a driver suddenly notices something out of place. Welcome to another edition of Killer Wives. You know, I truly believe that the souls of the dead cry out for those passers-by that will listen to their pleas. On the afternoon of October the 29th, 2012, in Sangamon County, Illinois, one man and his friend were driving a distance home on a long stretch of roadway when one of them eyed a mass lying at the edge of a creek. To the one man, it appeared to him as something akin to a deer carcass. It might have been simply due to the fact that this was deer season and hunting was known to have gone on in this particular area. Although not the norm, rarely do wounded deer get far enough away before they collapse and die. Understanding this, the driver proceeded at speed beyond that point in the trip. But the driver could not let it rest. The fact that this mass seemed rather odd. Once he got home, he still couldn't let it go. After sitting a while in his comfortable chair, he telephoned a couple of his friends to go to that particular road marker and check it out. Believing that if their friend thought it was worth investigating, then that would be enough for these guys. All they knew at this late night was that they were supposedly on a mission to confirm or deny the existence of an unclaimed deer carcass, or whatever it was he thought he saw. As the men get down into the muck of that low land, crisscrossing in search of something they didn't have any exact location or clue to find, they found themselves surrounded by darkness and heavily wooded cove. It was dark enough in this small area with the sun and not much brighter with the aid of high-power flashlights. Searching, crisscrossing. There was the friend up above. I turned to the left, I seen nothing. To the right, nothing still. But if he saw it, it must be here. It seemed like there was noises all around us in the woods that day. And then, things change pretty drastically.
immediately.
Oh my God!
There it was. He had found it. He had found the remains, but it was not a deer. This was a human carcass. They called the police and returned to the top roadside to meet him. The men, nervous now, knew that there was something wrong, something that you needed police to handle, something that they could never handle. The next morning, the investigation continued. House to house they went, asking neighbors, anybody along that road, did you see anybody here last night? Have you seen any strange cars? Did you notice anybody dropping off things? The crime scene taped off now. Investigators went about finding evidence and information that could connect this body with a person, this person with a murderer.
Each investigator that arrived on the scene described it to a man as being something very graphic. The chief of police said that it was a decapitated body of no known origin. The body also didn't have any arms or legs, and someone had cut off the head. The arms and legs off this person was amazingly brutal. Even the most hardened detectives were shocked by the brutality of this crime scene. This town was supposed to be a safe area. The only thing that happens out there in that particular part of the country is farming and hunting. And we were right in the middle of deer season. Hence, this originally looked like a small deer carcass discarded from the driver's vantage point in the road. At this point in the initial investigation, the investigators had to identify the remaining portions of the victim's body. And since there was no recent missing persons in the area, it is just a torso. This made the identification process nearly impossible. Investigators said we had no fingerprints, we had no face, and no way to actually do any test. This led to the detectives on the scene to do what is called good old-fashioned police work, to canvass the immediate and surrounding areas for any signs of the man's identity. They went from door to door of the surrounding county homes in that quiet and serene area. They wanted any information or identity to the person that brought this torso to rest at this point in the woods. Now, this was primarily on the list because if the community had a monster like this on the loose, it was better that they were caught instead of being free in the general public. Then, all of a sudden, one of the detectives on the scene spotted a white glint from a nearby guardrail, leading to the disposal area of the body. On closer inspection, it appeared to be a receipt from a large retail chain on a recent purchase. Could this connect the victim or the perpetrator to the crime? This was collected as evidence, and investigators immediately followed up. Now, there were other clues on the scene. Apparently, whoever did this was a slouch at covering their tracks. You could see what appeared to be a red smeared substance consistent with blood, poorly wiped on a guardrail that was adjacent to the crime scene. This was consistent with something or someone dragging the torso over that railing. This would be consistent with the rather crudely tied extension cord that was apparently tied around the shoulders of the deceased. This was proof positive that someone had transported this person to this spot and left them believing that they would not be discovered. Now, investigators began to work with the evidence collected on the scene. There was further evidence at the guardrail that someone had done a hasty job of attempting to wipe clean the bad deed that they had done. There were napkins on the ground. It is believed that they would have blown away if it were not for moisture present in that area. Investigators went to that particular retail store listed on the address and the receipt. Upon arrival, they identified themselves to the team known as Loss Prevention. And they had Loss Prevention team to pull up that exact camera moment above the register to where the purchase was being made. When the store's loss prevention experts at the police behest zoomed in on the purchase of that receipt, they see, to them, the mystery of the shopper. It was a young black female, and she was purchasing a rather unique device at this midnight hour. She purchased a Sawzall, which is a particular company brand of electric reciprocating saw, used for construction. Since the police were trying to make sense of this horrific, heinous murder, could this be their first clue of involvement from this patron? Or did an accomplice encourage her to purchase these items for them? What they did know up to this point was that an African American male, which was missing legs from below the knee down, hands cut completely off the arms, and the head being severed completely off the body. This was the crime scene. Then cops hit pay dirt when loss prevention with modern cameras is able to zoom in closer to the actual transaction. The surveillance camera video is able to show the mystery woman paying with her credit card. From this, local police are able to pull the woman's credit card information, her name and address. Her name, Watasha Denton McCaster. From Watasha's past, they are able to find that no criminal behavior exists. In fact, she has a flawless record that would lend no credence to her involvement in such gruesome occurrence. It seems the only hit they have on her person is that she is a local straight-A college student with no criminal history. They find that she only recently moved to the area. By all appearances, she was one fantastic 22-year-old honor student at her high school. And when not excelling at that school, Watasha could be found attending church as a good parishioner. This was not the modus operandi of a brutal killer. Now, she was also known to have lots of friends and dedicated to her family as well. This too was not the background for murder or dismemberment. Normally, this type of person would be a loner and not excel in a career or relationships to others. Nor would they be so demure in size like this woman. In fact, in their investigation, Watasha, they never heard a bad thing uttered about her. She was the epitome of a model American. But considering everything that had taken place up to this point, during that investigation, investigators decided to place the college student under a 24-hour surveillance. As is customary with the high lead in this sort of crime, the police department put a routine 24-hour surveillance on her house. She went about her normal each and everyday life. Not once did she suspect that police were watching her home. Not once did she suspect police were watching her movements. Because of this, they were able to surveil and document matters including something fairly routine such as taking out the trash. Once she deposited her trash to the curb, this trash became public property and fair game for the investigators. But would this yield any clues of where they were going completely in the wrong direction with this straight-A student, who was a regular church attendee? Now, investigators wasted no time and moved in right away to secretly seize her garbage. Once they took her refuse from her back alleyway to where they inspected it, they saw something rather odd in that first bag. This small in stature woman was apparently throwing away freshly demolished floor tile. Now, apparently she had strength enough to demo an entire section of floor. Odd, yes, but not necessarily incriminating. Still, the investigators sent the tiles to the crime lab for further testing. Now, maybe this flawless student had been remodeling her house, or perhaps she had some connection to this savage murder. Who could tell at this point? But how, they thought, could this petite, meek, mild-mannered, no criminal history woman have done this murder? They believed up to that point that the killing was so brutal, it seemed more like a mafia-style hit than something a wife would do to her own husband. This must be gang-related or drug-related, folks, not from Sangamon would do. From Sangamon County, they didn't think this thing could happen. Anybody could do this heinous crime, said one of the detectives. We do not see this type of crime in Sangamon County. Meanwhile, at the coroner's office, futile attempts were being made at identifying the butchered remains of this African American corpse. For the time being, undercover cops keep a close eye on Watasha and crime scene investigative teams continue to sift through her trash on a daily basis. By the second day of staking out her house, investigators are presented with an unexpected break in the case. One of this A student's garbage bags doesn't appear to be garbage after all. This one bag recovered at her curb without detection happens to be full of men's clothing. Camouflage clothing, as in U.S. military. When detectives started seeing Army soldiers' uniforms, we knew that there was someone that could have been in the home besides her. And that someone was male. Now, some of the missing pieces of the puzzle were forming as they found a state driver's license mixed in with the discarded uniforms. The ID card had been cut up, but it was a man's ID card. The detectives were able to reassemble it like a jigsaw puzzle. The name on the card? Norman Raymel McCaster. That name matched the name on the uniforms discarded in the trash bags. This guy who was in the home was a soldier. Norman Raymel McCaster was a citizen of Sangamon County and a soldier with the rank of specialist in the Illinois National Guard. Norman McCaster was a medic of that unit. He had attended basic training in the Houston, Texas Department of Combat Medic Training at Joint Base San Antonio, Fort Sam Houston, which was responsible for training the Army's 68 Whiskey Healthcare Specialists, more commonly referred to as combat medic. And there's something else about this National Guardsman. Little did he know, Specialist McCaster had recently moved to Springfield, Illinois with his wife, Watasha. Total name, Watasha Denton McCaster, and joined his current National Guard unit. So now we know Watasha is married, but her husband doesn't seem to be home. Detectives place a call to the Illinois National Guard. The National Guard unit at the time informed civilian authorities that Norman McCaster was a no-show at a recent mandatory drill. Since the timing of his disappearance may not have been a coincidence, the police decided to question Watasha at her house. She was interviewed by Sergeant Vose and another officer. They asked if they could come in and talk to her. She let them in, and it was said that she had a very polite demeanor with the investigators. During their cursory interview, she is said to have described her missing husband as her high school sweetheart. But she informed police that they had been having troubles lately due to Mr. McCaster's drug addiction. At that point, she informed investigators that he had gone since he left a few days ago. He had been gone. So she said that he took off with his druggy friends from St. Louis. That's where he went. Detectives waded deeper into her story with questions like, what kind of car did he leave in? She answered back, I don't know. The lead detective questioned her on what he left in the way of clothing. She answered, just the clothing on his back. That's all he took with him. Now, after the preliminary investigation with his wife, the investigators contacted Specialist McCaster's father, who lived in the same town. In their conversation with Norman's father, investigators get a complete 180-degree picture of her husband than what his wife has recently given them. His father informs detectives that his son does not do drugs, for one. He also did not have a clue that his son was missing up to that point they contacted him. 2. Police are now baffled why Mr. McCaster's wife did not tell his father, to whom Mr. McCaster was very close to, that his son had ran off. Curious still, she never reported her husband as missing to the police. Detectives then decided to turn the investigation over to Norman's work life for a better picture of his personality and to find out who was behind what took place in that wooded area. When detectives interviewed fellow soldiers and co-workers who knew the missing 22-year-old, they found a picture similar to the father's and further away from what his wife had painted of him. They reported that they didn't find any evidence of those interviewed to corroborate a story of an abusive man or a man who does drugs. Every comment about the missing soldier was good. Detectives got a break in the case later on when they were offered additional surveillance footage from a local hardware store. It seemed that just 24 hours after Watasha purchased a saw, she returned to make another questionable purchase. That one would expect be consistent with cleaning up a crime scene. This time she was purchasing cleaning supplies. and other items such as commercial-grade heavy-duty plastic that one would use in order to prevent spills on surfaces like splatters. Apparently, Watasha was now cleaning up an area, ripping out towels and using dropped plastic, all without telling police that she had a missing husband. With dead ends trying to identify the body through autopsy, investigators decided to contact the Illinois National Guard and make a very specific request. They asked for a sample of Specialist Norman McCaster's DNA. Since he was in the National Guard, there's a DNA sample that is kept at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. Due to the success of DNA testing on past accounting samples, the United States government in 1992 established the Armed Forces Repository of Specimen Samples to house and protect DNA blood reference cards for all active duty military, reserve, and National Guard personnel. This she never counted on. With the cooperation of Illinois State Police, taking a DNA sample from the torso and seeking to match it with the DNA from Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, and the result was a solid match. They knew now that this torso was actually the body of a U.S. service member, and up to this point, all roads leading to his killer ended at his wife's front door. Detectives first informed Specialist McCaster's father, Marshall Banks, that it was his son whose partial remains were found in the woods. An investigator had Norman's own wife, Watasha, secretly under surveillance for weeks. Investigators in the case feared that Watasha would skip town. There was an upcoming Thanksgiving holiday approaching. Because of this, they invited her to come downtown for just a few more questions on the missing persons case for her husband. Would she make it? Watasha agreed to meet with detectives for an interview. Apparently, she is not worried and feels that her charm and her past pleasant demeanor will allow her to escape scrutiny once more. Later during the trial in this case, forensic scientists from the Illinois State Police Crime Lab in Springfield will ultimately testify in court that murder victim Norman Raymel McCaster's blood was found on the rear cargo doorstop of the car he owned with his wife, as well as on the green latex glove investigators collected from Watasha Denton McCaster's trash. Now, these are the exact wordings of that interview held at the police station that day. From the detectives, they asked her, "We were helping the guard out on a missing persons, who according to them is missing. Norman. That's why we came to talk to you." Watasha says, "Okay." The detectives, "And we briefly spoke at your house and you were nice enough to come over here with us, right?" Watasha, "Mm-hmm." Detectives asked Watasha about her relationship with her husband. At that interview, she paints a picture of estrangement and abuse, starting with an argument over Norman watching pornography. So she's already into besmirching his character. First he's a drug addict, next he's doing pornography. Watasha, "He just threw me into the wall. And I got so nervous because, that's my husband, Detectives, right. Watasha, "And he had never put his hands on me like that." The interview between Watasha and the investigators continues on. Detectives ask, "How long ago was that?" Watasha, "That was about maybe 2 months ago," she says. Then detectives recall something odd they noticed at her house during the initial conversation with the young woman. And now it's starting to make sense. There was a calendar on the wall in the kitchen with the anniversary date all blacked out. This from a state's attorney, John Milsner. Their 2-year anniversary was coming up, and Norman McCaster was not going to make that 2-year anniversary. And she was going to make sure of it. So Detective Voles asked a leading question at this point. The detective, "Hey, you said your anniversary was Monday. I can't remember when you said it was." Watasha, "It was October the 26th. Would have made 2 years we would have been married, and I kicked him out on the 24th. Like he actually left, took all of his stuff on the 24th. All of his stuff. Remember, cops already went through Watasha's trash and found what appeared to be Norman's belongings, including his military uniforms, credit cards, and ID cards." So the detective asked, "And when he left, what did he take?" Watasha, Everything. The detectives. Everything? Detective Voice has just caught Watasha in a lie. Detective, you told us at your house that he left with nothing but the clothes on his back. Watasha, I mean, he got everything. Detective, did he? Back to Watasha. Yeah, I didn't keep anything. I don't want to keep anything, she says. The detective, well, you know why you didn't? Because you threw it all out in your garbage. That's why. That's why we're here. We know where Norman's at. Watasha, where is he? She asked. Detectives, you know where he's at. Watasha, no, I don't, she says. Detectives. Detective Voice hands her 2 search warrants. One for her home and one for a sample of her DNA. Detective, if we hadn't made ourselves clear, this is homicide, okay? Watasha, what is homicide? Watasha Denton McCaster might not have known what a homicide is, but cops believe she committed one and place her under arrest immediately. Watasha goes on. I mean, am I under arrest or something? Detectives, yeah. Watasha, I'm under arrest? Detectives, yep, you're under arrest for the concealment of a homicide. There's nothing more that I'd like to do to get this straightened out, is what they wanted to ask her, okay? We want to get it straightened out. Watasha, I want a lawyer. Detective, pardon me? Watasha, I want a lawyer. Detectives, you want a lawyer? Okay. At that point, the interview is continued and then completed. Watasha is taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder, dismembering a body, concealing a homicidal death, and obstructing justice. At the time of her arrest, she was being held on a $5 million bond at the Sangamon County Jail. At trial, prosecutors revealed the results of forensic computer search performed on her laptop computer, and they were something. The computer searches, they all started around the beginning of June. This would have been almost a full 4 months before the murder. Her searches included such things as how to kill your husband, how to kill a spouse and get away with it, and the list goes on and on. How to kill somebody with Visine, which according to prosecutors would explain the puzzling contents of one of Watasha's trash bags. The prosecutor says, we found numerous bottles of Visine. If you ingest that in the human body in large quantities, it can be fatal. So she was trying to poison her husband before she tried to shoot her husband, before she tried to dismember her husband. So a forensic toxicologist testified that he discovered above normal levels of that particular Visine in Norman McCaster's liver. But prosecutors are just getting started when they called their star witness, a student who attended college with Watasha. Apparently he loaned her a gun, and she returned it a day later, and it was missing 2 bullets from the magazine. When she asked to borrow the gun from her classmate, she told him that she was a part of a National Guard unit, but they hadn't trained her to use a weapon yet. Now, to me, this was a clear falsity on the surface because that training is part of basic training, and you can't become a soldier without it. When I heard of her borrowing her husband's identity, I thought back to psychological terms, and one such as imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is the idea that you've only succeeded due to luck and not because of your talent or qualifications. This syndrome was first identified back in 1978 by psychologists Pauline Rose Clance and Susan Imes. So in their paper, they theorized that women were uniquely affected by imposter syndrome. Now, to what I was thinking, why else would a woman who was, by all accounts, smart, chose to copy a career that she did not have, but thought of herself as better than? So, detectives believe that she shot Norman in the head with that gun that she borrowed from a friend. That's why his head was cut off with a reciprocating saw, and then his hands were cut off and his legs cut off. Either she thought that no fingerprints could be found, so they couldn't determine who when the torso was found. Who was it? Who could have done such a thing? So, they also thought it was easy for her to cut him up because Norman weighed over 200 pounds. Easy for her to move Norman, they surmise. But cops believe she still had to use a dolly. That theory comes from more damning surveillance footage. This time, it's from an entirely different story. where Watasha is seen purchasing a dolly, then placing a truly chilling order. She ordered a lie-flat freezer, but she later canceled that order. But what happened to the rest of Norman's discarded parts was the question in this case. Where is the rest of Norman? Investigators believe that Watasha went up to Chicago based on some evidence from her phone pinging on cell towers in that area. They looked around and there were several bridges over this area, other wooded areas, said one detective. His head, his hands, his legs were never recovered. After 7 hours of jury deliberation, Watasha is found guilty and sentenced to 78 years in prison. But what was Watasha's motive for murder? What was her motive? They believe that Watasha was a perfectionist who had never failed at anything in life but her marriage. She knew her marriage was crumbling, and when it started to fail, she came up with a plan, and unfortunately, she carried that plan out. Norman Raymel McCaster most likely died a few days before his body was found, minus head, hands, and lower legs, at the bottom of that embankment. In the year 2012, Dr. Scott Denton of Bloomington, a forensic pathologist who performed an autopsy on the then unidentified torso on October, testified in the first-degree murder trial of McCaster's wife, 24-year-old Watasha Denton McCaster. Denton described marks on the ends of McCaster's bones that he said were made by the back-and-forth motion of a saw and cuts through the skin made by a sharp knife. There also was evidence of a large animal biting on one of McCaster's lower legs. A former UIS student who loaned Watasha Denton McCaster the gun authorities believe she used to kill her husband testified. The former University of Illinois student who loaned Watasha Denton that gun believes she used to kill her husband said Watasha borrowed the handgun on October 24th of 2012 and returned it the next day. Derek Momino said he had 2 classes with Denton McCaster in the fall of 2012 and that she had told him she was in the National Guard but hadn't yet been taught how to shoot. He said he knew the woman as Watasha Denton and did not know she was married. So apparently she was not as nice as she pretended to be. It took investigators 18 hours after Norman Raymel McCaster's body was found on October 29, 2012 to establish his wife as a suspect in the case. A Sangamon County jury deliberated more than 7 hours after the trial to decide unanimously that Watasha Denton McCaster was guilty of the dismemberment, murder of her husband. His death was on her hands. Sangamon County State's Attorney John Milner said he wasn't surprised the jury, 7 men and 5 women, took that long, even though circumstantial evidence just kept piling up during the 5.5 days of testimony. She knew she was wrong. She knew she had his trust. What is the vow they ask you to take? I promise to love, honor, and cherish my husband. To the specialist and a former medic, as a soldier myself, and now a retiree, and a veteran, I salute you. Join us next time